Everyone, welcome to episode 7 of This Valorant Life. Join Adam and myself as we dive into strategies for starting a new act, insider tips around how to deal with ranked anxiety and placements, and lastly, how to master your map win rate. Before we jump into the episode, I want to give a shout out to Find Your Audience. If you, like me, like our logo and branding and think it's pretty sweet, if I don't say so myself, then you need to give Find Your Audience a shout. The world of marketing is confusing, and if you want to make it easier for yourself, book a call. Links are in the description. Lastly, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that we're publishing episode 7 right after we published episode 4, and that's not in order. And it's really because this topic, talking about how to start a new act, we thought it was more topical right now, so we're going to publish out of order. We'll get back to our regular programming next week. And with that, let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of This Valorant Life. I'm Tim. This is my co-host, Adam. Today, we're going to be talking about starting a new act. And so with that, Adam, what should people be thinking about with placements as we jump into this new act for Valorant?
So I guess I can kind of quickly distinguish between episodes and acts, because in an episode, there's 3 acts. So with a fresh episode, your placements, it's like 5 games, whereas a fresh act and not an episode is 1 placement. So I think that's pretty important to distinguish. With placements, it does affect your MMR slightly because it's a soft reset. So you do kind of want to try pretty hard if you're below Immortal to Ascendant, and we can get into that a little bit further. But yeah, you do want to try to get those wins just because it's going to influence your MMR more than the rest of the games in the act.
Oh, really? So in your placement games, after the episode reset, it's actually more like the MMR effect of those games is higher than the rest of the act.
Yes, from what I think that's how I was in League, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works in this too, because it softly resets your MMR. So I think it has a higher threshold there. Okay. And so as we go into those, I think a lot of there are people who have ranked anxiety, right? And I think that even gets ramped up for their placements. Like the ranked anxiety kind of goes through the roof for placement anxiety. Like how should people be thinking about that as they go into their placement matches? That's a great question. I guess with ranked anxiety, for me, most of that stems from lack of preparation. I would say if you're going into a ranked game, such as your placements, and you're feeling really stressed because it's a new reset and, you just want to, maybe beat your previous rank, try to prepare a little bit more, either warming up or maybe taking a look at some VODs just to feel a little bit better. And then when you're actually in the game, one thing I like to tell myself is take it round by round. So new rounds, you leave everything in the past, and then you just go from there. There's this quote from a player I played against really early on in a tournament. His name is Ohai, and I watched back the VOD when he played against, he played the finals, and they were losing pretty hard. And he goes, play it like it's 8-8, like the score. And I was like, oh, that was really good. And they were losing really hard, and they brought it back and won. And I was like, and that stuck with me for a long time. That's something you can try telling yourself round by round, play it like it's 8-8, something like that. And that should refocus, I think, your attention to you playing and not the actual outcome, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think we talked about this before because we'll have him on at some point, but Coach Kona, I think he talks about this idea of really resetting between rounds, because I think unlike League, we really do have some true downtime when we're either dead or the round is over. And at least the thing that helped me was take your hands off the keyboard, just push them down your legs, because it's just this kind of mental reset, almost of resetting into your body, and then you can let go of what happened in the round. Maybe you whiffed, or maybe someone made a terrible mistake, and then you can kind of just help you physically in person refocus for that next round in the game.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm assuming when you do the hands thing down, it moves your eyes as well, and that's probably good to reset your attention on the screen. So I could see that being really good.
And you kind of mentioned previously, but what's the difference between placements for high elo versus low elo? So high elo, you're saying ascendant and above?
Yeah, and the reason why I say ascendant and above is because in episode resets, anyone above ascendant, the highest they can place is ascendant. So let's say I'm Immortal 1, the episode resets, I can only place ascendant 1 anyways. So sometimes people will just fly through their placement games because their MMR is higher anyways. Some people will intentionally throw by forfeiting at round 5. just to get quicker up on the leaderboard if that's your goal. And it doesn't really affect your MMR that much, in my opinion, just because you're above the threshold. With act resets, the highest you can place, I believe, is Immortal 1, maybe Immortal 2. I'm not actually sure, but it resets your points, like your RR, but not all the way to Ascendant.
But episode resets for high Evo places everyone in Ascendant?
Yes.
So then right now, like day 1, episode 1, or episode reset, there's like no one in Immortal 3?
No.
It's just like
it's impossible.
It's like a ghost town?
You have to grind it. But since it reset the act recently, people did place Immortal 1 or Immortal 2. And then like I think after like 24 hours, there was like 1 Radiant. But you do have to grind out your wins. Yeah.
Okay. And what we were talking about this, you saw this on the Broken by Concept podcast with Coach Curtis, but this idea of a kind of a 3-week challenge.
So when I heard this, I thought it was like a brilliant idea. It's kind of similar to how I do my coaching program, which is like a 4-week, like almost contract between me and the client, because like they have to play a certain amount of games and, you know, having a warm up and cool down. And like this is on a smaller scale that you give yourself a challenge or a contract by yourself. Mm-hmm. So because the act is fresh, it's perfect to experiment with new things in your process or in your system. For me, that might be I already warm up and I cool down most days, you know, like aim training wise. So maybe something that I could implement for me this act would be VOD reviewing, like, you know, 1 game or maybe a few rounds, something like that, you know, just doing that for 3 weeks and see where it takes me. And I think for people listening, this is going to be really useful for the new act, because unlike me, it's a lot more achievable, I think, to get higher rank, right? If you're below Immortal, you can feasibly make Immortal your goal, and that's obtainable for most people. So I guess where I'm going with this is, it's very easy for someone to do in the new act to be like, hey, let me try this out, see what happens for 3 weeks, and I have to do it for 3 weeks. And 3 weeks, I think, isn't too long. It's not too short, but it's long enough that it gives you good data, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I think what you're pointing out is that it's important to kind of stick with something for a little while to see how it's working for you. Like one day or 1 rank session where you did a full warm up and you did well doesn't mean that warm up will make you play consistently well for the next 3 weeks. But you'll probably see a pattern over 3 weeks. You're going to give yourself the opportunity to like recognize what's the signal versus the noise, like specifically like what works for you and what doesn't. To recap, the things that people could consider doing is like commit to doing VOD reviews, right? Commit to doing like an aim training warm up, whatever that looks like, whether that's out of program or it's in the range. I think you could also commit to doing what we just talked about, which is like resetting between rounds and seeing which one of these actually makes an effect for you. But the key is to just try to not add everything at once, because when you add everything at once, it kind of ends up being a little too much. But I don't know. What have you seen with your clients? What have been the most effective interventions with them in terms of getting them to commit to 1 or 2 things for like the 4-week coaching period?
The main thing is getting a set amount of games. Some people don't play enough. Some people play way too much. Mm-hmm. So kind of just finding the medium or like the balance for their energy levels and fitting that schedule tends to be the biggest outcome. For people like myself that overthink settings a little bit, you could maybe think about the 3-week challenge as like I'm only using this sensitivity for 3 weeks. I'm only using this crosshair for 3 weeks. And that's actually something I did when I was getting aim coached by Minigod, and I talked about it on stream yesterday, but I benchmarked myself again, and I'm immortal in like every single category of scores for aim training, aside from tracking. But it's like a really big jump from before, where like I had ascendant scores, diamond scores, plat scores even. So it's like a really big improvement, and that's just
pretty
because
significant.
Super significant. And now, like, I shouldn't say I don't overthink sensitivity, but I think about it a lot less. And it's like, it's just my mouse skill. Like my mouse control wasn't good enough before. You know, targets far away, I would be like, oh, if I just played on a lower sensitivity right there, I would have killed the guy. Or a target really close and I couldn't follow him because I'm trailing behind. My sensitivity is too low. When in reality, it was just a skill issue. So, you know, by keeping that sensitivity for a set period of time, just training with it, I think really helped me adjust, if that makes sense. Like, come to peace with it's a skill issue and not
and I think what
issue.
You're pointing to, like, is that we all have this like desire or hope that there's like one weird trick that will unlock everything, right? Like that one day we'll all just find out that we're Super Saiyans, right? And we just have to like flip a switch. But like part of it is like recognizing that trick in your brain, that like your brain will be like, it is just your sins, because it's like really, what's the word? It's really compelling, right? Like you do kind of wish that like this 0.01 change in your effective DPI is going to be, that's the problem, right? Instead of like, it's actually the hundreds or thousands of hours you have to put into the craft of learning how to get good at the game that's actually going to benefit you.
And that's hard. That was hard for me to accept for some reason.
I think we all have it. I think, and we all fall into it. I think the big thing for you is like that you actually recognize that and you like broke out of the loop. Whereas I think most people just stay in the loop, right? Like you said before that you aim coped, right? But some people elo cope, right? Or like riot cope, like it's the queue, I'm in loser's queue, right? Like, so people go different places with this, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What has it been hard for you to be able to audit and go back and look at how things have gone? Like when you've tried to implement changes to your process or routine, how do you notice, or how do you make that part of your process to notice, like, is it going well or is it not going well?
That's a good question. I would say for me specifically, I don't really have a hard time auditing because I can feel the difference pretty immediately. Maybe it's because I don't want to call it a skill or a talent, but maybe my awareness when I play games, I kind of know when I'm in form or when I'm not. And like when I make a mistake, I know if it's a mistake due to nerves, emotions, or like a mistake just because I wasn't warm that day. Like I think I have a pretty good idea of identifying that right away.
Have you always been good at identifying that?
I think so. Like even coming back from like when I played League of Legends, for example, I was like, that was really bad. And then like I can like replay it really quickly and then kind of think about what to do differently. I kind of use that as an excuse sometimes to not VOD review, but I shouldn't. But with that reasoning, when I implement something new, I can kind of tell if it's going to be good or bad. Warming up, for example, has been extremely beneficial for me. And after like the first day or two that I was doing the ramp, I continued to do it because I was like, this is really good. Whereas like, you know, VOD reviewing or aim training after playing, like those things I find is less obvious probably for most people to see in your gameplay. But like for me, when I VOD review and I play a map that I just VOD reviewed, I feel super confident on it. Like I have a plan, I know what I'm going to do. So those things are really easy to, I think, identify its benefits, if that makes sense.
I think that's like really keying in on an important point, which is noticing the parts of your game that you have a leak. Like in poker, they talk about leaks, like the areas of your game that you're not good at. Like if you really feel super unconfident in your gunfights, like if you're that crouch sprayer, like the instant crouch sprayer, like you probably just need to have more reps in your warm-up or part of like your maybe your post-match ranked routine of just focusing on that one thing of like just strafing, good gunfight hygiene, not crouch spraying. And or if you're like me, feel completely lost in terms of how to play a map, it stands to reason you can either VOD review games or you can quickly VOD review your game and then just go watch a pro and just notice the different emphasis on different parts of the map and how they play that agent and how they do it. And then when you come into the game, you're going to feel way more confident about it. But part of it is like noticing where that leak is and then trying to think about doing something about it.
And I think that's probably hard for a lot of players. Just from my experience with coaching, is a lot of people autopilot when they play, like a lot. It'll like the half is over and they're just like, why did I do that same thing every single round type of vibe? And then they don't really understand and take that to the next game to not do that. They do it again, you know, and it's pretty frustrating to see, but I guess that's where my work comes in. Just to maybe showcase an example for myself is I've been struggling on bind, Viper specifically, playing controller. And for some reason, this enemy, like the enemy team always just runs through my orb and my molly and stuff. And like, I don't get impact. So I was like, what's going on here? And I watched the Xander VOD right after. I watched his VOD playing Brimstone to see like maybe I should switch agents to see if that makes a little bit more sense. And what I noticed was the position I was playing wasn't really meant to be like what I was supposed to be doing. Like the emphasis points on the map were different. I was like, oh, I'm just playing the agent in the wrong spot, you know? So maybe that's something I can experiment with today and hopefully get a little bit more success. But
so where were you playing Viper and where should you be playing Viper? So like this is you're talking about defense, right? So
yes,
like let's say Viper often plays B site because of the wall through the teleporter. So like where do the pros play Viper? Is it on B site? And if so, where?
Yeah, so you're right. The Viper does play B, and the problem was I was playing A short. So I was playing U-Haul.
Okay.
I was playing U-Haul and having my orb on the box so that when they A rush, I molly and I break Skydog or whatever. The problem is they just flash and then the jet dashes and then no one's hit by my molly. So it's just like, oh, maybe I'm just in the wrong spot. But watching the pros, you know, they play Orb and Hookah or they play Orb B long. They have the wall for the A players. And then, of course, that lets them farm the Orb B long as well to get that ult.
Yeah.
You completely deny B hits that way. I'm just like, why wasn't I doing that, you know? And I'm just more comfortable playing A because as a Raze player, Razers do play A.
Yeah.
You know?
And because of the teleporter.
Yeah, exactly. So I just fell into that habit. I was like, oh, you know, it's the same thing. I'll just play U-Haul, Molly. It's fine. And it wasn't working.
And so, the map then, the geometry and the way the map gets played, fundamentally, that the high leverage points of that map shift depending on the agent you're playing.
Yes, very much. Like even on Brimstone, to take the one step further, the Brimstone doesn't really play towards B. He's like perma showers or perma U-Haul, so you can play smokes for Hookah. You won't be able to smoke long anyways. Playing for showers makes sense because you can smoke A short and showers, whereas if you're playing Viper, you can't do a shower smoke if you're playing A. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
That was just a little change. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's super interesting. I'm surprised that. Oh yeah, what I was gonna say was it's not dissimilar to how I think when you did a Curry VOD review, right? I think I think he played B long most rounds because he can flash B long, he can flash through showers, and then he has so much information around where the enemy team is.
Yeah. The beauty with Sky on Bind is you get to control both extremities, B long and showers, which is incredibly important because that's where both orbs are. You can kind of understand what the enemy team is either defaulting or hitting just based off of the info you get from Sky there. Yeah.
Cool. In terms of, I guess the other question I had was, do you think it's hard or do you find that it's hard for your clients to VOD review? Or is there like one particular thing that clients or people you work with like are kind of allergic to working on?
The VOD review part, I think it's about 50-50. Some people that I work with VOD review themselves without me saying anything. Some people are like, don't VOD review themselves at all, which is why they work with me, which makes sense. I think the biggest obstacle that people come to is fleshing out their playbooks. For some reason, it's just like, I like how I play this map. I don't want to change it unless it comes up in the one-on-one VOD review sessions together. But if it's like out of the scope of what I do with work for them, and we look at their tracker, for example, and let's say like Lotus and Bind are their two worst maps. If we get a Lotus VOD, I get to take a look at their Lotus and improve it. But then obviously their Bind is also bad. I'm like, hey, maybe you can take some of the stuff that I told you today and look at a Bind VOD and then try to improve your Bind. And then they don't do it. So I think that's like a really big thing is like people just overestimate their ability to play certain maps instead of accepting that the reason why their win rate on that map is bad is because they're not playing the map either correctly or they're not playing their agent correctly for that map.
And I think we've all had those games where like, let's say on defense, it feels you're getting run over every game or every round. And we think like, oh, like it's because, you know, I should have hit those shots or whatever. But I think a lot of times it's because you're just fundamentally positioning wrong. You're communicating wrong or not communicating with your teammates. But you're also just in a position where you're vulnerable or you don't have many choices, right? And part of that is like learning the geometry and the meta, really, the meta game, the meta positioning game of like every map, which I think is really different depending on the agent you're playing and the side you're playing on.
No, that's very good. And I just wanted to maybe quickly say along with that is like, that's probably the first thing people should address for their playbooks on defense is one, how to stop a rush. for all the sites that you're playing on, and then 2, how to actually fight for that map control if it's, let's say, a main ascent, and like how to do that on your agent. If you can kind of figure out 1, how to stop a rush, and 2, actually how to contest map control as defense, your playbook is pretty much like 80% of the way there, and then you can kind of get into rotates and then gathering info and all that stuff. But you can't do any of that if they just rush the site and you lose. Like, you have to stop the rush first. And it's just so many times I see people get run over. I'm like, why didn't you use your util there? And this is so true for people learning new agents. And to call Woohoojin out specifically, because we're doing a duo queue series together, I was looking at his games from yesterday.
Yeah.
And he uses his util a lot less than I think he does on controller, because he doesn't know where he wants to take the fights, or he's not sure of what fights to take. But like, I'm 100% positive he was playing, like, let's say Omen instead of Raze, he would have used Omen blind and contested the space. Because he doesn't have that flash on Raze, he's just fall back.
Yeah.
And he plays a passive spot. So that's something I'll bring up with him today.
We were just talking about, I'm just thinking about this out loud. We were talking at the beginning of the call how, like, right after an episode reset, your MMR is higher leverage, right? Like, it matters more. And I think what I'm hearing you're saying, like, around stopping the rush, is that, like, stopping the first 2 seconds of, like, when they're about to execute is really way more impactful than using util when they're already flooded site. I think if you can, or I think, like, sometimes you see players do this where if you can just trap everyone except for the duelist who's dashed on the site, that's actually like a pretty good use of util.
Yeah, no, that's really accurate. And maybe to explain why it makes sense is because most people rush in ranked as like a default, like when you're like autopiloting. So if you can just stop the rush, they have no more options. They'll have to go into a bad default. And if the enemy team specifically, isn't coordinating well, you can just pick them off one by one. That's why ops are so good. That's why judges are so good. 1, because they can stop rushes, but 2, because they're really good against defaults. And yeah, I think if people can figure out how to stop rushes, and it's unbelievable, but people in Radiant still don't know how to stop rushes. Like, either because they're playing fill agents or they're just not adapting to the enemy team's execute. It's honestly one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm staring at minimap. We have 3 on one site and then they just get no kills. I'm just like, what are you doing? If you can kind of figure that out and stop, let's say, 50% of the rushes even. It doesn't have to be every single one, but if you can stop 50%, you're going to rank up, like just off of your defense half alone, just because people don't know how to do it. And that's how I've been ranking up playing controller. My offense is not good. I don't know how to lurk. Who's just going to grill me on that today, I think. And then my post plans are pretty mediocre because I don't know what to re-smoke and, timings and all that. So, but my defense is pretty good because I know how to hold down a bomb site. And I have a 60% win rate from the last act just from doing that, I think.
Okay. Maybe we'll move on to the last one, which is what's a reasonable goal for ranked improvement? Like, in one act, I think, it's possible, I think, to improve. It's definitely possible to improve 1 rank. Like, if you're in plat, you can definitely aim to get to diamond. It can be a bit of a stretch in 1 act to get from plat, let's say, to ascendant, but it's possible. But it's probably not possible, I think, to go from iron to diamond. But what would be your understanding of that? Like, how would you explain that to a client? What's like a reasonable goal for them to approach a single act?
So if you're new to the game, I think the lower ranks are just easier to climb than the later ranks just by learning Valorant fundamentals. So like, if you're below plat, you should be able to go from the lowest rank possible to plat in an act if you're really dedicated. Maybe gold, maybe silver. That depends on how many games you play and how quickly you pick up things. But I think that's reasonable. Let's say like you are in gold or plat and above, then 1 to 2 ranks, like 1 to 2 tiers, I would say is pretty reasonable. Anything more than that means that either you're super over-indexed in a certain skill from either a previous game, or you're just extremely talented in, I don't know, team coordination, or maybe you're just really good at aim and you just out-aimed at people. So those are like the anomalies. For example, someone that I worked with went from plat to immortal in like 3 weeks after I started working with them because they were naturally gifted mechanically. But I think like that's the far end of extremity. Most people go from plat to diamond, or maybe even plat 1 to plat 3.
So in that case, the mechanically gifted client that you had, like just mechanically gifted as it relates to like aim and movement, and they just weren't playing their agent or the maps well?
Yes, completely true. They're playing super passive, like, and this is a common theme I see from people that are really gifted mechanically, is instead of leveraging that, they play super passive for some reason and end up in clutch situations or like impossible situations to win. I don't know why. Maybe it's because like in the back of their head, they think if I die, the round is over. Or maybe because they're so used to taking their fights in a certain way, which makes them gifted mechanically, and they know that, they want to take every single fight in that fashion, so it slows them down. So they're like baiting unintentionally. So half of it is, if you know you're good mechanically of your skill rank, is just looking for more duels and figuring out how to do that.
And like as people approach this act, reasonable for them, especially if they're in low elo, to be able to get to plat. And if they're in gold or plat, they can definitely move up like plat 1 to plat 3, or a plat 3 to diamond 2. Like those are totally reasonable.
Yes.
But we also know that people can get over obsessed with their rank. So with your, what would be your advice for people as they set a goal? How do they set that goal without it kind of becoming this like anxiety inducing thing?
So the overarching goal is important because like you tell yourself, I want to be a diamond player or I want to be an immortal player. So maybe you can reframe that and say like, I need to do these things to become X rank player. I think that would work. Maybe more importantly, instead of just looking at the rank, look at your win rate for certain maps. Because like it is true, like if you can just figure out how to play a certain map for your rank and get it to above a 50% win rate, and you do that for all 7 maps, you'll just naturally rank up. I think that's like one, much more isolated, and 2, much more obtainable to focus on win rate per map, because you can actually solve those problems because it's like pattern recognition and, you know, figuring out what works for you and things like that. Whereas like rank is arbitrary, right? It's like all of these factors come together and it's like, oh, you're a plat player, but then you can look at your maps, so you have like an 80% win rate on Haven, 20% win rate on Lotus, and then it evens out. Or maybe you have like a 40% win rate on every single map and you're losing rank, but you think that your mechanics are really good, so maybe you have to figure out how to leverage your mechanics on every single map. Just sure. Yeah, I think to sum it up, win rate per map I think is a much better metric than your rank.
No, I think that's really great actually, in the sense that sometimes improving seems like so huge, like it just feels like this massive problem. Like how do you improve? Just get better at everything. It's like there's that meme where like, oh yeah, they did great, they just need to move, this team just needs to improve on their aim mechanics, decision making, mid rounding, you know, like everything, utility usage, everything. But like I really like this idea of like just focus on your worst map, figure out how to play that, and then you have this like kind of almost this task list of like, okay, like my worst map is Bind, I'm just going to improve Bind. Okay, my next worst map is Lotus, so I'm just going to improve on Lotus. If I on these individual maps create playbooks and are able to play more confidently, and then I do that sequentially for every single map, I'm naturally going to rank up.
Yeah, it's worked well for me. I think it's the most natural process to go to. It's just improving your maps. Because like unlike League of Legends, you play all the same maps, so you just improve agent mastery or champion mastery. Yeah. You know, Valorant's 7 maps, so yeah, you have to get pretty comfortable.
And you know, I think that's like a really important point, because you don't hear people talk about it that much, right? Like there's a lot of YouTube videos of like, I did aim training for 30 days and this is what it gave me, right? There's like, I can guarantee there's like 0 videos of like, I studied Bind for 30 days and this is what it taught me. This is what it gave me. That would be
so funny. Yeah, that would be
the deepest secrets of mine. I think you'd probably just end up being like, I think there's like this one guy who just explores the maps and like finds like beautiful parts of the map. Like that'd be like 30 days in Bind. It's gorgeous. I've not learned how to play the map.
There's an Easter egg over there. Yeah.
I think that's it. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that sums it up. Yeah. Just take a look at your data, your tracker, you know, see, like I said, what maps you're struggling on, maybe what agents you struggle on. Take note of what maps you like, what maps you don't like, regardless of win rate, because that's maybe where you can focus more of your attention. And then, of course, with the agent stuff, that might, if you're a fill player, you can see where you're winning the most and kind of just narrow on that. It's very hard to improve playing a bunch of agents. So, yeah.
For sure. With that, we'll sign off until next week.
Until next week.
Bye, everyone. Next week.